another special sit down with your guest host, April Sands. This time we're sitting down with two very special persons. That is Sir Randol Fawkes' daughter and son. Of course, many of you know that it is Majority Rule Day, and we, the PLP Party, wanted to bring you all something special and dynamic, something we think you all would appreciate. So none other than Miss Rosalie Fawkes, and of course, her brother, also the son of Sir Randol Fawkes, David Fawkes. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So we have so much that we want to kind of dive into a little bit, but let's start from the basics. Obviously, many persons know the Majority Rule Day. At least many of us should know the importance of Majority Rule Day. But I'm going to go into a little history, just a little bit for those who may be tuning in, maybe that are young, that may not know. But Majority Rule Day became a public holiday in 2014. It commemorates the Bahamas gaining majority rule for the very first time on January 10th, 1967, symbolizing the promise of equality, a level of playing field and fair play for all Bahamians. With the emancipation from slavery in 1836 and gaining independence from Great Britain in 1973. The achievement of majority rule is considered one of the most important events in Bahamian history and, of course, our country. So both of these lovely persons who join me on camera right now were fortunate enough to be a part of that time. I don't even know if I was not that I don't know, but I was not in existence at that time. But of course, I love hearing stories from that time. And from you both, what I love about you in particular is knowing that you both were children. You both were very, very young. And I wonder even how Majority Rule Day was for both of you at that time through a child's eyes. What was some of the most striking events that you can remember that might have been most memorable to both of you during that time?
Well, thank you very much, April, for having us on the show, first of all. And I'd also like to thank the PLP for all of the contributions that they have made, along with our father, Sir Randol, over the many decades. April, I remember January 1967 distinctly because after school, instead of going home, we always went to the House of Labor in the St. Barnabas constituency, where Dad had his office, but also was the campaign headquarters. And so we were fully integrated into the campaigning. So when Dad went door to door, we fortunately or unfortunately had to go door to door with him because we just stayed there till 5 o'clock when it was time to go home. The other important part of it was I was going to Queen's College from the 3rd grade. And I remember that distinctly because at that time, Queen's College was integrated, but it was just becoming integrated. And so there were many of the children were the children of the United Bahamian Party representatives. And so even as children, there were constant fights. Political fights, as we do have today between FNM and PLPs. In those days, it was the UBP and PLP. So as things change and as the fortunes of my peers changed, the dynamic of the school changed as well. In terms of what types of cars came up, if you had a chauffeur driving you to school or things like that. So it was quite a magical time.
Oh. Oh, that's really interesting.
Yes.
And so for you also, Ms. Fawkes, what was your experience on that day?
The year 1967 was one of the best years of my life. Life changed for me. Before that, we had a very modest existence, but with the coming of majority rule, we all became VIPs. And there was the social scene. I really don't know what my father was doing in his office, but we started to have soirees in the house. There were parties to go to. We traveled to Freeport with my father. We went to Exuma for the opening of Out Island Inn. And I recall distinctly when he took all of us to New York, he went there to tell the Bahamians to come home and build a nation. And I enjoyed it thoroughly, thoroughly. So it was a good time for me.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
We lived our lives on the red carpet, and I remember people like Jackie Robinson coming to the house. And David, you recall going into the library and getting a book and asking Mr. Robinson to autograph it. Do you recall that?
I have that book in my library today.
Oh, you do? I didn't realize it. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. And Sidney Poitier came to town, and oh goodness, and a lot of foreign reporters came here. People were quite captivated with that 1967 election, even on the international scene.
So safe to say that even during that time for you both as kids, it was exciting. You all were excited. It wasn't like a mundane thing where it was just like, oh, this was. Did you know that it was history in the making at that time at so young?
We did. I didn't really understand the mechanics of what had actually occurred, but now I have a much greater appreciation of what had been achieved, especially when you look at the backdrop of what is occurring in the world, and specifically in the United States today, with potential disenfranchisement of persons and their rights to vote. So now I understand more deeply, and I did some research that Rosalie's put on the Randol's Facebook page about what exactly occurred. And before majority rule in the 40s and 50s, if you had property, each property you had could vote. If you had a company, each company you had could vote. If you were a woman, you could not vote. And if you marked your X, because most Black Bahamians couldn't read, and you marked your X outside of the block, the vote was spoiled. There was open voting, where you had Black people were going with their employers, and they had to actually vote in front of their employers, and the employers made sure they voted for the UBP. And then also you had the issue of the vote being open for weeks. So a wealthy person that had corporations, if you were a wealthy United Bahamian Party person, you had corporations all over the Bahamas, and you had property. It gave you time to go to each island and vote for the representatives there. This disproportionate methodology of elections was the way it was. And so it took many, many years of fighting in order to bring about the change. So as you look at what is happening in the world today, and even in the Bahamas in particular, you always should take a step back and turn your head around and look at history to see where things may not be going in the direction they should.
And I'm glad you took the conversation to that direction, because I kind of, me and Miss Fawkes kind of talked about this a little bit, but I want to know a little bit more from your father's words, some of the things that he would have said even back then that needs to maybe be heard again even now today, because it was so many years ago. Because I think you were kind of talking to me a little bit about how it's so crazy that during that time, he said some things that were almost ahead of his time, and that could be, pertinent to where we are now. So I want to kind of have an idea of maybe some things, or maybe you can, it doesn't have to be the exact quote, but some of the things that could, be heard again and that we need to hear again as Bahamians.
April, from Randol's writings, which date back to 1942, when he was about to graduate from the government high school, I found 2 spiral-bound notebooks. I don't think my father even realized that he still had these books because they were buried very deep into the library. I'd never seen them before. But he started writing his thoughts. And I'm going to put that book up on Facebook this week so that people can have access to how he was thinking. And everything is in his own handwriting. But like Samuel the prophet, it appears that he had a calling very early in life, even before he foresaw the trade union movement and the direct course that his life would take. He knew that he wanted to dedicate his life to the service of the oppressed from the age of 21. All right. And he also saw where he was going to have a very hard life because of the path that he would take. And so here are some of the quotes from the journal. He has here, the most sensible and incontrovertible truth in this world of ours is that right shall ultimately triumph over wrongful might. Another quote, if the right to lead a free, honest, and respectable life can be obtained only at the price of ridicule, contempt, and discouragement of some of our fellow men, all I can say, it's worth it. Okay, this is what he wrote in 1945. And he even predicted the national motto. 1945, he put into his diary, upward, onward, and always forward is the spirit that shall always command true success. Now, Sir Randol's focus was really on, he used to call them the common man, all right? And what he saw in his day was that governments did not attach any value, they did not attach any dignity to these common men and women. And so other entries in his diary speak to this. He says, a great man should not approach common folk with the idea that he will be lowered, but with the consciousness that he will raise them to a higher standard of living. And another quote, no living being has a right to despise another. Now, 2 weeks before his death, he had an interview with Lindsay Thompson. And you can see the theme remained the same throughout the course of his life. 2 weeks before his death in 2000, he said, government has failed to satisfy the just demands of the labor movement simply because they always treated the laborers as units of the stock exchange and not as men and women made in the image of God, who are entitled to an equal place at the conference table. And my mom always tells the story of a lady, very prominent person, I dare not mention her name, but one day she approached my mother and she said, Jackie, why does Randol keep company with these kind of people? He wasn't raised like that. But there was Clunas Devaney, and Clunas Devaney said, and he said this in 2000, he stood with the maids, he stood with the janitresses, all right? He stood with the garbage collectors. And these are the people that stood with Sir Randol in bringing about the change. And I want to emphasize this. It was not the professional class, all right? It was this illiterate group of men and women who were at the forefront with a small band of professional men agitating for the changes that they wanted to see. And, you know, nowadays, a lot of people, I remember when we had the 50th anniversary of majority rule, oh, you know, majority rule never happened for us. But I'm telling you, a lot was achieved during that period of intense fighting. It was almost like a 14-year battle. This wasn't just a moment in time. This was a culmination.
I was going to touch on that a little bit because I recall, obviously, you know, we have the Burma Road riots that took place, the general strike, the women's suffrage. There were things that led up to, of course, Majority Rule Day happening. And I wanted to ask both of you how you felt, because for me as a young person, I'm 28 years old, it gives me great pride to look back at a time like those, even though they were difficult. I feel a sense of dignity knowing that Bahamians fought for so much that we are able to see today. And I'll tell you, for my 28 years of living, I just don't feel that I've been able to see a lot of moments like that, which might be a good thing, but then might be a bad thing. But I want to know how you both feel about seeing the movement of the culture from then and now. Do you feel like we are the same group of Bahamians who are willing to fight when things happen or go wrong, or are we a little bit more relaxed? Are we a little bit more privileged? Do we not have things to fight about? You know, how do you all feel about looking at the timeline since then?
Yeah. April, thanks. I'll take that question. In terms of you saying you're 28 years old, and before you said, what about Sir Randol's writings? And I went to the Facebook page that Rosalie has put together, and in it there is a letter that Sir Randol wrote when he was 27 years old to the governor of the Bahamas, who we were a colony then, and the governor was appointed by the Queen. And the governor, there was the parliament, but it was kind of a make-up parliament because there was not majority rule back then. And he wrote at 27 years old about proportional government. So in this letter, they had formed what is known as the Citizens Committee. And in 1950, and this letter is on the Facebook page for those persons that want to look at it. And in point 8, he says, the common practice is to place one Negro on the board or committee who must represent the opinions of 85% of the population. And what he's saying is that he wanted participatory government. And if we're not on the boards of all these government corporations, if we're not on town planning, if we're not on BEC, if we're not on Batelco, if we're not on a whole list of boards, we are essentially not only disenfranchised because we don't have a vote, but we don't control the country. And the Citizens Committee made a number of recommendations. And they were placing Negroes on every important board or committee, placing more than one Negro on most boards, appointing Negroes who are not members of the legislature, as well as those who are, appointing Negroes as chairman of boards when possible, allowing the representatives of the people to occupy the senior positions within the boards and committees. So when you say, how do we feel in terms of how that they felt, I think today there's still a feeling, I know I feel personally, and I'm 60 years old this year, a disenfranchisement from the country. I feel disconnected from it because even though I have the right to vote, I don't believe that with the advances. Remember, we're dealing with a parliamentary system that's over 400 years old that had its start under kings and queens, and it was brought about in order that the people felt there was some representation. But the system itself is antiquated because once you mark that X, PLP or FNM, you essentially disconnect from the government for the next 5 years. And that is why it feels for you as a young person and for me as an old person disconnected from government. And you say, well, how can we still have a consolidated monopoly for electricity when in Florida, we are all solar in Florida Power and Light? How is it that we have exchange controls which stop Bahamians from investing outside of the country? How is it that there are almost monopolies formed around everything that we do in this country? Why is it that we can only bring in items into this country through one port and they have a monopoly for 20 years? So even though we have the right to vote, the economic power, make no mistake, is still concentrated, not in Caucasians and Negroes, but into those persons that are fortunate and those that have to live within a system. So, essentially, the same things in 1950 that the Citizens Committee was coming up against, young people, I feel, are feeling disenfranchised as well.
That's incredible. That is so true when you say it, and the way that you said it, it's so true. Ms. Fawkes, do you side with that? How are you feeling in terms of where we are today as well?
Well, every generation has to fight to keep whatever was won from the previous generation. You can't sit idly by and not participate in the democratic process. You have to have a voice. You got to speak out, you know. And so I was thinking about, you talked, April, about that struggle, and you said you had an admiration for that period of time when people fought for change. And there was a template. And when I look at Sir Randol, I'm just going to try to skip over some of the traits that augured well for him. And I think the first thing I would say about him is that he had a vision, and he had the vision early in life that he was going to dedicate his life to the oppressed, okay? Then the second quality, we see a lot of people jumping up in the air and fussing and rowing, and then you see no more of them, you hear no more of them. But he had perseverance. How do you sustain a fight from 1953, which is the year that I was born, right up to 1967? The next thing about Sir Randol was he had courage, all right? A lot of people are not going to venture out there if it means somehow they're going to lose, all right? They will lose esteem, they could lose their job, but he suffered, all right? He sacrificed. And so many people don't want to sacrifice to that extent. He put his life on the line.
And if I could stop right there, because that's a part of the answer to my question. Why are we like that? Why are we afraid to sacrifice? Because back then it was almost like people were willing to do that, to put their life on the line, nothing else mattered. And I'm wondering, where did we lose that passion, and why did we lose that passion?
Now, April, you said, yeah, people were willing to put their lives on the line. But remember, I think a lot revolves around leadership, all right? And around a charismatic type of leader who can inspire people to stand up. And I talked about sacrifice, and then I want to talk about perseverance, keeping the struggle going until you got or achieved your goal. Now, here's something that we have to look at: integrity. Now, this is something that, oh my goodness, it still is with us today, a lack of integrity. The very fiber of our country, okay, is being destroyed by corruption. And the people are speaking out about it, and very boldly. Sometimes I'm amazed at how forceful the people are on social media, all right? And even at an early age, he was talking about honesty. He said, if anyone would learn the art of climbing in life, he should follow only those who have honestly reached the top. Another quote, the greatest legacy a man can bequeath to his heir is that of an honest life. All of these written in 1945. Money can only buy the material things. Character, the moral and spiritual values are priceless. And of course, in his latter years, he always marched with a banner. Righteousness exalteth a nation. And a simple definition of righteousness is right living, all right? And so I want to talk also about another trait he possessed, and that was faith. He persevered, but he had faith in God. And what I found so poignant in the last chapter of The Faith That Moved the Mountain, he said one of his lifelong dreams was to get rid of the United Bahamian Party, but he wondered how that could be done. He said he had no money, no powerful friends, no means to influence, no means to impact. But he said he was reading the scripture. And he came to the conclusion that it did not matter if he was poor, but if he walked with God, he could defeat the enemy. And he went on reading the scripture, and he thought about people like Gideon and was it Moses? Those types of people, they saw themselves as being adequate, okay, but they exercised faith in God. And so that religious or spiritual component factored heavily into his life. And the way I see majority rule, I must mention this, I never hear people talk about majority rule in this respect, but majority rule was a miraculous event. That 1818 wasn't just a mere coincidence, just a mere time. He was the lone laborite. He said for years he wanted to get another person elected on the Labor ticket so that he could have somebody to support him in the House of Assembly, but that never happened. And so that 1818, Sir Alvin Brennan said that he would accept the position as Speaker, and that neutralized his vote. Speaker has the vote. And so when God gave him the power to take his one vote and to give it to the progressive liberal movement, and it enabled them to form the next government. But you see, that was divine intervention. God allowed that tie to occur so that a man who had been in the forefront, in the vanguard of the fight, would come into a final victory with his people. That's the work of God. And people think majority rule, they don't see the great significance to this event, but to me, I see greatness in it. Also the fact that it ties into that verse in the book of Judges, where it says that the Israelites crossed over the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month. You see? So there's sort of quite a few spiritual parallels that we can look at and see the hand of God at work.
It's interesting that both of you bring up, in your own way, a good timeline of your father. I think that both of you have done such a great job in allowing his legacy to live on, not just in this one interview, but of course I know that normally, and particularly Ms. Fawkes, I know that you do interviews, both of you, I see both of you pulling up information on him, and you're running the Facebook page, and you are truly the same qualities that you speak of in your father, both of you have also in you. When you speak of perseverance, you speak of faith. These are things that you are carrying out, of course, in your own way, his legacy. And so I value that also in hearing you and listening to you. And I know that many others do as well. Yes, I really, I know that you have a Facebook page that you all are running, and I want people to know about it. What's the information that how can people get to it? What's the name of it? If you could just give some details to that, please.
Yes. The name of the page is Sir Randol Fawkes and the Bahamas Federation of Labor. And I always include them because they stood with him and they should not be forgotten. And I have, so many posts there and so many more posts that I need to put on. But nevertheless, I realize that when people go to the page, they wouldn't really know the extent of the content because Facebook keeps scrolling downwards. So it was last week that I decided I would just go through all of those posts and I would itemize them. And then I took that information and I pinned it to the top of the page. So you can go in there and just pin in whatever you see in that menu. Sedition, Martin Luther King, Bahamas Federation of Labor, Labor Day, a name. You can just put that into the search engine on that page. And all of the posts related to that word or to that topic will come up. Yes.
It's a treasure trove of information which we find school children going to, and also whenever persons in the archives, for example, when they redid the Southern Recreational Grounds, the pictures that you see there have been taken from Dad's archives. The list and depth of information goes into a cloud-based database where we keep hundreds of documents from that era in time. And Rosalie has been working on this for since Dad's death. So over two decades. Some of the other index items that you can look up are the 1963 Constitutional Conference, the 1963 Unemployment March, a very touching article on a British soldier who came down during the general strike and never left. It's an incredible article, and Rosalie interviewed him. It talks about the early days of the Progressive Liberal Party. There's a whole section on the general strike. There's the issue of independence, a section on Dr. Doris Johnson, Martin Luther King, and loads of pictures of Labor Days in the 1950s, and how majority rule became a holiday. So it's a treasure trove of historical information, the likes of which we believe that we are the only persons in the Bahamas that have put it together and freely sharing it with the Bahamian people, with also a copy of his entire book, The Faith That Moved the Mountain, and the other three books.
David, The Faith That Moved the Mountain is quite a formidable book, and you have school children needing to access information. So for the National Heroes Award, I use that as an opportunity to give an abridged version that school children would find more accessible. And so that's there as well. It's simply called biography, a pictorial biography. And,
okay.
Yes. What I'd like to say, when we went to New York in 1967, and we went there specifically, Daddy was such a patriot, you know. And one of the things I'd like to say about him was that he was an idealist. He thought that when this Negro government came into power in 1967, that we would enter into a utopia where we had perfect laws, and or it would just be a new dispensation. But we're not going to go into that. It didn't happen. But he was looking to build a great society, and he was trying to get people to come back home and help to build the nation. And
sorry, Rosalie, on that point, it's the same thing that has happened today, where we have a Bahamian diaspora. Most of the young people of the educated class have told their kids and are still telling their kids, when you go away to college, try not to come back to the Bahamas. So we have an incredible brain drain from the country because we have not created opportunities for young persons. Whereas in 1967, before majority rule, there was a Bahamian diaspora, but Dad, being the first Minister of Labor, went to New York, and many Bahamians came back to build this great society that he dreamed of, this utopian society. And
I remember the speech that he gave in New York, and I have it right here in front of me. He's saying that we have to begin to search the forest of humanity for the best and the brightest. You know, I'm in my 60s now, and I'm heading up an organization, but I realize, you know, that the number of years that I can further invest into whatever it is I'm doing in life, it's limited. Okay, and so this is a time now when all leaders, political leaders, religious leaders, in all the various spheres of endeavor, we have to start looking around, searching for these people that can start to run with us as we do the final leg of our journey.
It's more important, the infrastructure that we have, of the economic class structure that we have in terms of the monopolies that I mentioned earlier. No matter who you put in power, if we don't start to change the actual system, then we still won't resolve the problem. So you could put young people in these positions, but fundamental change in the Bahamas, the D average will not change if you have the same educational system, but just young people running it.
And
You see, so these types of changes won't occur unless there is visionary leadership to actually change the structure, which means diversification and breaking up all the monopolies that surround us.
which I just like to say, and I understand what both of you are saying, and I think the same end goal is in mind, that there will be change. But I do agree to start from a place of the ground up. And of course, the system. And, you know, it's funny because while we were on the phone earlier, Ms. Fawkes, we were having this exact conversation that things are in such a place or in such a way that it could be so difficult to even, we were talking about hopelessness, and that many Bahamians have reached a place of hopelessness because the problems are so deep rooted that it almost feels as though it's too much to change in order to get to the promised land. But I will say this, that something interesting that both of you are saying that I want to emphasize is a leader with vision. I, as a young person, understand that if we can just get that leader in place that comes and sees a new, fresh day for this country, I truly, truly believe, and is willing to disrupt things, and is willing to, you know, I was just reading about how Sir Lyndon Pinling he had thrown what was it again?
The mace.
Out of the the House of Assembly. I mean, how bold! I just, you know, it just gives me chills to know that was our leaders back then. And to this, in the year 2021, I can say how proud I am to know that we had these passionate leaders for the people, because that's why he did it, for the people. And I pray that hopefully as election time comes up, we are able to see that type of passion, that type of aggression, that attitude towards fighting for the people, because this few years that we just finished up, we need that. I feel like the people are hurting. People need.
We've actually gone backwards.
Yeah, but what we need to do.
Let me say something.
Yes, let me finish this. I think at this point we have a general election coming up next year. Okay, we have got to start looking. I'm not saying that all of the people that we have in our opposition and government need to go. I'm not saying that. But we've got to start. You can't keep doing the same thing and expecting change to come. All right, we need new leadership to come to the fore. Some people are saying, oh, you can't find good people to go into politics anymore. They are there. But we've got to search, and we've got to extend an invitation, and we've got to start preparing them. And so, because you can't expect change to come if we keep doing the same thing over and repeatedly. That's all I'm saying.
Right. My issue is not the leaders, right? In fact, over the last couple of years, April, we've actually gone backwards. So we've been under emergency law for almost a year, right? An emergency law is actually the removal of the democratic system because we are in an emergency. But my question is, are we in such an emergency that we have to suspend basic parts of the little democratic system that we have? And so these are the types of questions that need to be asked. And how do we come out of this emergency law? Does it have to stay on for another year? Because even though the vaccine is out, the pandemic will continue on. So are we going to have 2 years of emergency law, right? How are we going to run an election when the post office itself doesn't work? Are we going to go back to the old ways of running election where you have to stand up in long lines? Have we produced any technological changes to upgrade the electoral system? If we're using the old register, what is happening now to register all the thousands of new voters that have come up? And why can't we do the registry electronically like they do in the United States? So because we continue to not advance, you could put any leader, Rosalie, in there. We need vision for change. We need decentralization. We need to break up the monopolies. We need more representative government where people actually believe that you just don't vote once, you vote many times for many different peoples. Like in America, where you have a system of checks and balances. We don't have that. You know, we have the Minister of Finance saying, we have enough money and we can borrow 600 million. But where's the audited statements? I'm a CPA, right? So they can say anything. Oh, we have enough central bank reserves. We have 2.3 billion and we're not in problems of devaluation. But I can't find US dollars on the street. So, you know, these types of things, they're not going to change by just changing the people. There's fundamental underlying changes that are needed at the base level. And if the political parties just talk about, well, it's my time now because you messed up last time, we're just going to continue to recycle.
Agreed. Everything this turned out to be more a dynamic conversation than we laid out, but I agree with both of you. And I agree with—
And April, what you have to look at, you know, I mean, there's a whole lot of complaining going on now about leadership in government and all of that. But if the people who possess requisite skills don't come and offer themselves, how do we move this ship of state forward? You know, and that seems to be the big problem. We can't seem to attract, but everybody's jumping up. Oh, I'm running for this party. I hear about Trump running. All right, I don't need the people. The people are emphasizing what is wrong with the present, but they're telling us nothing about themselves.
Yes,
but yet they expect us to vote for them. And you know, and
true.
Okay, go ahead.
No, this is so true. And a lot of what both of you are saying is so interesting as I listen. And I think of myself just where I am. Sometimes I feel like a small voice just because of my age. But it's amazing how I feel just as passionate about these things as both of you are speaking of it. So I'm just amazed by this conversation. A lot of the things both of you are saying is exactly what I've always thought.
See, and another thing with political parties, right? I'm not talking about any one particular parties. They want people who are going to toe the party line. Yes, men, yes, women. So once you show yourself to be analytical, you're a critical thinker, you can speak and you can articulate, and they don't want you anymore. All right? You have to go along with their plan. And a lot of people, they don't have the fortitude to say, no, I'm not going along with that, because they know that's the end of their political career and their income. And so, you know, the political parties today, I don't know if they are looking for the type of individual that we need who can carry this country forward. You know, you got to be faithful to the leader of the party. You know, in your mind, if you want to get anywhere politically.
Exactly. And this is why I said with election time coming up, these are going to be some of the more real conversations that we're having. Our brothers to the north of us, the United States, they have clearly, one thing I can say about them, and I admire it too, is that they will allow their voices to be heard. And so I hope that us moving forward as well, we take note that we allow our voices to be heard as, like you said, Mr. Fawkes, a democratic nation.
And one thing we have to look at, the 50s template. Now, I don't care what you say. All of those men had flaws, and maybe they did this and they did that. But wow, did they fight a battle? But the first thing they did was to get seats in the Hall of Parliament. You could talk on Facebook as much as you want, but that's not the seat of power. All right? You got to get inside Parliament, and that's where your voice will really count. And they banded themselves into a party in 53, and in 56, they had 6 representatives in the House of Assembly. That's a template to follow, all right? And that's what we need to do. But, well, I don't know.
Well,
I feel so hopeless.
That's how we have to end the conversation. I don't know. But you know what? I truly believe that we are moving maybe slowly but surely in the direction. Like I told you earlier, I have a small bit of hope that things will change, maybe not as fast as we'd like them to, but I do believe it will come. A lot of younger persons are coming up, people who are tired. The conversation I hear on the ground right now is nobody cares for any of this political stuff. Either you're going to be making sense or you're not going to make sense. And so a lot of people are overstanding on the side of a party just for the sake of standing on the side of a party. People are really trying to look desperately for change. And we've been through a lot these past 2 years, as I would have mentioned, the pandemic, the hurricanes. Things are happening that are making Bahamians really be forced to have to think about what really matters now. And so, like I said,
but April, sorry to interrupt you, but even in the midst of a pandemic and even in the midst of hurricanes, we're not, there was one, I was a businessman. I was a managing director at Ansbacher Bank for 20 years when we went through a most difficult change. And one thing that you do as a businessman is you never let a good crisis go to waste. And that is what we have done with the pandemic, and that is what we've done with the hurricanes, right? So what is the government saying the solution is for the reinventing of the Bahamas, right? So they put together an economic council, right, that came up with a bunch of solutions that you don't hear about anymore. But when you read through those solutions, they're the same old thing, right? And all you hear about is when is Bahama going to open up? When is Atlantis going to open up? When is the hotel in Cat Island going to open up? And you say, well, why do we need the same old tourism model? Or why do we need the same old banking model? Or why do we need the same old real estate model? Can we actually produce anything? Can we do any farming? Can we do anything different, or are we just have to wait for the cruise ships to come back, right?
And I'd like to say this is, like you're saying, I'm just kind of co-signing. This is the perfect time. Out of any other time, this is the perfect time to reinvent, like you would have just mentioned, to rearrange. While everyone is out of work, there are so many people out of work. There's so many people that are just. This is the perfect time to break up things, to shake up things. Then, had we been already in the, once we already get back into the swing of things, then it's kind of harder to get back out of the swing of things. This is the perfect time. I totally understand what you're saying about don't let a crisis go to waste, because if there's any time to change things, it's right now. So
I don't see, I'm sorry, I see zero change. Nothing has changed, except everyone's poorer. Much poorer.
Yes, I totally.
100,000 people need to go in line for food.
Mm-hmm. And we're not talking about it enough. If you want my honest opinion, I think we're acting like Bahamians are okay, and for some reason we have this habit of acting like Bahamians are okay. We're all okay. We're not okay. I've seen the lines myself. I've seen the people. And for whatever reason, and this is why I asked earlier about. How do you feel about the Bahamians back then and now? Because personally, I may not have been around in the 60s, but I think hearing the stories then and seeing now, there's a difference. There's a divide between what we're willing to push for and fight for versus what our fathers and mothers were doing back then. But that's my opinion. And
unfortunately, we have become our own oppressors. So there is not a color barrier. Our oppressors are now our own color. So it's a harder fight because there isn't a black and white divide. There's rich and poor. And you see that in America as well under the pandemic, where the stock market has gone up an incredible amount and where most people, workers are unemployed. They just gave them $600. It's a drop in the bucket, right? That caused the whole Senate to tilt to the Democrats because even Republicans can't live off of $600. So, but whereas the stock market just hit another record and continues to do so. So the wealthy are becoming wealthier and the poor are becoming poorer. It's a worldwide phenomenon. But we can do better.
Yes, agreed with you. Well, I really, we expected to have a very short segment, but I told you all it would be, conversations like this. It's amazing how much time can slip by, but we are now wrapping up now. I want to thank you both again for taking the time to speak to me, taking the time to be with the public on this day, because while this is a holiday, of course, we want to know why we're celebrating this time and also time to reflect on how we can continue to preserve the dream and the vision of course, persons like your father, Sir Randol Fawkes.
And thank you. And I'd like to give a special thanks to the PLP and under the leadership of Brave Davis and Chester Cooper. You guys are doing a phenomenal job, and let's keep up the opposition.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And thank you, April. Very charming hostess, and we thank you for the invitation. And you keep up the good work. As a young person, we're very proud of you. Keep up the good work.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And to you, our viewers, thank you all for tuning in. Of course, you all know that we have wrapped up our segment here, but we will be back very soon with Coffee Break. And Coffee Break, we'll be rolling out a new slate of interviews, a new dynamic conversation. Just stay tuned and we'll be right back. Thanks so much.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.